What happens when a house refuses to stay empty? When decades of abandonment don't silence the voices that still echo through rotting walls? What forces keep drawing people into structures that have been left to decay? And why do so many who enter these forgotten places never quite leave the same way they came in? These aren't questions from ghost story folklore, but the terrifying reality discovered by urban explorers, real estate developers, and unfortunate neighbors who learned that some houses remain inhabited long after their last human residents have departed. The Blackwood Estate in Salem, Oregon, had been abandoned for 43 years when urban explorer Jake Morrison first documented its existence on his YouTube channel, Forgotten America, in March 2019. The massive Victorian mansion, built in 1887 by railroad magnate Augustus Blackwood, sat on 12 acres of overgrown land just outside the city limits, hidden behind a wall of blackberry bushes and Douglas fir trees that had grown wild in the decades since the property's last caretakers had walked away. Jake specialized in documenting America's abandoned places, factories, hospitals, schools, and homes that had been left to rot as communities shifted and economies changed. His videos attracted hundreds of thousands of viewers who were fascinated by the decay and mystery of forgotten structures, and he prided himself on thorough research and respectful exploration of these lost pieces of American history. But the Blackwood Estate would prove to be different from any abandoned property Jake had ever encountered. The house didn't just contain the remnants of a family's life. It seemed to be actively preserving and protecting something that had been left behind when the last residents departed in 1976. Jake's initial research into the property revealed a history that was both tragic and suspicious. The Blackwood family had built their fortune in the late 1800s through railroad construction and timber harvesting, becoming one of Oregon's wealthiest families by the turn of the century. Augustus Blackwood had spared no expense in constructing his dream home, importing craftsmen from Europe to create elaborate woodwork, stained glass windows, and architectural details that made the house a showcase of Victorian excess. But the family's prosperity had been short-lived. Augustus died in 1903 under mysterious circumstances, officially ruled an accident, but local newspapers of the time hinted at suspicious evidence that was never fully investigated. His widow Eleanor continued to live in the house with their 3 children, but the family's fortune rapidly declined due to poor investments and legal challenges to Augustus's business practices. The children never married or moved away from the family home. They lived as recluses, rarely seen in town except for necessary shopping trips, and became the subject of local gossip and speculation. Neighbors reported strange lights and sounds coming from the property at all hours, and delivery drivers often complained about an overwhelming sense of being watched when they approached the house. Eleanor Blackwood died in 1954, followed by her eldest son Marcus in 1962, and her daughter Vivian in 1968. The youngest child, Thomas, lived alone in the massive house until 1976, when he simply vanished. His disappearance was never explained. One day, neighbors noticed that the house lights were no longer turned on at night, mail began accumulating in the box, and eventually investigators found the house empty with no sign of Thomas or any indication of where he might have gone. The property had remained abandoned ever since, passing through various ownership changes as county taxes went unpaid and legal disputes over the estate dragged on for decades. Several attempts to develop or renovate the property had been abandoned after workers reported equipment malfunctions, accidents, and an overwhelming sense of hostility from the house itself. Jake's exploration began on a gray March morning when he parked his van at the rusted gate that marked the entrance to the Blackwood property. He carried his usual equipment, multiple cameras, audio recording devices, flashlights, and safety gear designed to protect him from the hazards of exploring decaying structures. What he discovered inside the Blackwood house would challenge everything he thought he knew about abandoned buildings and the forces that could inhabit them. The front door of the house was unlocked, which was unusual for a property that had been abandoned for over 4 decades. Most abandoned buildings were either secured by authorities or had been broken into by vandals, squatters, or other explorers. But the Blackwood house appeared to be completely untouched, as if it had been waiting for someone to return. The interior of the house was a time capsule that defied explanation. While the exterior showed obvious signs of age and weather damage, the inside was remarkably well preserved. Furniture remained in place, covered with dust but not damaged by water or vandalism. Family photographs still hung on the walls, and personal belongings remained scattered throughout the rooms as if the residents had simply stepped out temporarily. Jake began his exploration in the grand foyer, filming the elaborate staircase and documenting the architectural details that made the house historically significant. But as he moved deeper into the building, he began to notice anomalies that didn't fit with typical abandoned property conditions. The house was too quiet. Even abandoned buildings usually contain the sounds of settling wood, small animals, or wind through broken windows. But the Blackwood house was silent in a way that felt unnatural and oppressive. Jake's audio equipment picked up his own breathing and footsteps, but nothing else. No background noise that should have been present in any structure of that age and condition. More disturbing was the sense that he was being observed. Jake had explored hundreds of abandoned buildings and was accustomed to the psychological effects of being alone in creepy environments. But the feeling of being watched in the Blackwood house was different, more intense and persistent than anything he had experienced before. As Jake documented the first floor rooms, he began to notice that objects seemed to shift position when he wasn't looking directly at them. Nothing dramatic or obvious, just subtle movements that could be attributed to tricks of light or perspective, but consistent enough to create a growing sense of unease. The dining room contained a table set for 4, with china, silverware, and crystal glasses arranged as if a family meal was about to begin. The food had long since rotted away, but the place settings remained perfectly arranged, suggesting that someone had been maintaining them over the decades. In the parlor, Jake found what appeared to be a family gathering frozen in time. Chairs were arranged in a circle around an ornate coffee table, with books and newspapers from 1976 still open as if they had been abandoned mid-reading. But the newspapers were in pristine condition, showing no signs of the aging and decay that should have occurred over 43 years. The kitchen revealed even more disturbing evidence that the house was not as abandoned as it appeared. The refrigerator contained food that looked fresh, despite the fact that electricity had been disconnected from the property decades earlier. Dishes in the sink appeared to have been recently used, and there were signs that someone had been cooking meals in the kitchen within the past few days. Jake's exploration of the second floor revealed bedrooms that looked as if they were still being lived in. Beds were made with fresh linens, clothing hung in closets, and personal items were arranged on dressers as if the occupants had just left the room. But the clothing styles and personal effects all dated from the 1970s, suggesting that whoever was maintaining these spaces was either very old or was deliberately preserving the environment exactly as it had been when the house was abandoned. The most disturbing discovery came in what appeared to be Thomas Blackwood's bedroom. The room was arranged as a shrine to the missing man, with photographs documenting his entire life from childhood to the time of his disappearance. But mixed among the family photos were images that Jake was certain hadn't been there when he first entered the room. Pictures of Jake himself taken during his exploration of the house. The photographs showed Jake from angles that would have been impossible for him to capture himself, and they had been developed and printed using techniques that predated digital photography. Someone with access to film development equipment had been photographing Jake's exploration in real time and adding the images to Thomas Blackwood's memorial display. Jake's growing panic was interrupted by sounds from elsewhere in the house, footsteps on the wooden floors, doors opening and closing, and what sounded like multiple people moving around on the first floor. But when he called out, asking if anyone was there, the sound stopped immediately, replaced by the same oppressive silence that had characterized the house since his arrival. Jake decided to investigate the source of the sounds, but when he reached the first floor, he found that the rooms had been changed. Furniture that had been covered with dust sheets was now uncovered and arranged differently. The dining room table that had been set for 4 now had place settings for 5, with the additional setting placed at the head of the table in what appeared to be a position of honor. More photographs had appeared throughout the first floor rooms. Images of Jake exploring the house, but also older photographs that seemed to show other explorers and visitors who had entered the property over the years. The collection suggested that Jake was not the first person to discover the Blackwood house's unusual preservation, and that whoever was maintaining the property had been documenting visitors for decades. The implications were terrifying. Jake realized that he was being treated not as an intruder or explorer, but as a potential new resident of the house. The fresh food, the made beds, and the photographs suggested that someone or something was preparing for him to stay permanently. Jake attempted to leave the house but found that the front door, which had been unlocked when he arrived, was now secured from the inside with deadbolts that hadn't been visible earlier. The windows, which should have provided alternative exits, were now covered with heavy curtains that couldn't be moved, and seemed to be attached to the walls with hardware that hadn't been present during his initial exploration. The house was trapping him inside, and his cell phone showed no signal despite having full bars when he first arrived at the property. Jake's GPS equipment was malfunctioning, showing his location as constantly changing even though he remained stationary. His cameras continued to function, but the images they captured were increasingly disturbing. The photographs now showed other figures in the house, shadowy forms that appeared to be watching Jake from doorways and corners. The figures became clearer and more distinct as Jake continued trying to find a way out, eventually resolving into what appeared to be the Blackwood family members, dressed in clothing from different eras, but all bearing the unmistakable features of the family portraits hanging throughout the house. Augustus Blackwood appeared as a stern Victorian patriarch, watching Jake with calculating eyes that suggested he was assessing Jake's suitability for some unknown purpose. Eleanor Blackwood manifested as a protective maternal figure, who seemed to be preparing domestic arrangements for Jake's permanent residence. The children appeared at various ages, sometimes as the adults they had become, and sometimes as the children they had been when the family was whole. But it was Thomas Blackwood, the family member who had mysteriously disappeared in 1976, who seemed to be orchestrating Jake's entrapment. Thomas appeared throughout the house, sometimes as the middle-aged man he had been at the time of his disappearance, but often as a much older figure who seemed to have continued aging during the decades since he had vanished from the outside world. Thomas communicated with Jake not through speech but through environmental changes that conveyed clear messages. When Jake attempted to break windows to escape, tools appeared to prevent him from damaging the house. When he tried to force open doors, the house itself seemed to shift and change, creating new barriers and obstacles. The message was unmistakable. Jake was welcome to stay in the house permanently, but he would not be allowed to leave. He was being offered membership in a family that had found a way to exist outside of normal time and mortality, preserved in their ancestral home through supernatural means that transcended death and abandonment. Jake's documentation of his entrapment became increasingly frantic as he realized that the house's preservation was not the result of careful maintenance by living caretakers, but rather the manifestation of a family that had refused to accept death and departure. The Blackwoods had found a way to remain in their home by trapping visitors and adding them to their supernatural household. The evidence was overwhelming and terrifying. Throughout the house, Jake found personal belongings and identification documents from dozens of people who had disappeared over the decades. Urban explorers, real estate agents, vandals, and curiosity seekers who had been drawn to the property and had never left. Their possessions were displayed throughout the house like trophies, and their photographs had been added to the family galleries as if they had been adopted into the Blackwood clan. The missing persons cases that Jake found documented in newspaper clippings hidden throughout the house revealed a pattern of disappearances that stretched back to 1976. Every few years, someone would vanish after visiting the Blackwood property, but the isolated location and the victims' profiles as transients or explorers meant that their disappearances often went uninvestigated or unsolved. Jake realized that he was experiencing the same fate that had befallen Thomas Blackwood in 1976. Thomas hadn't left the house. He had been consumed by it, transformed into a permanent resident who could never age or die as long as he remained within the property's boundaries. The other family members had already undergone this transformation in the decades before Thomas, creating a supernatural household that sustained itself by periodically adding new members. The house offered immortality and preservation, but at the cost of freedom and connection to the outside world. Jake would be fed, sheltered, and protected for eternity, but he would never be allowed to leave or contact anyone beyond the property's borders. He would become another ghost in the Blackwood family portrait, maintaining the house and preparing it for the next victim, who would be drawn to explore the mysterious abandoned mansion. Jake's attempts to escape became increasingly desperate as he realized the true nature of his situation. He tried to break through walls, dig through floors, and even attempted to start a fire that might force the supernatural residents to release him. But the house responded to each escape attempt by changing its internal structure, creating new rooms and corridors that led nowhere, and manifesting physical barriers that couldn't be overcome through conventional means. The Blackwood family members became more active and visible as Jake's struggles intensified. They moved through the house openly, no longer hiding their supernatural nature or their intentions. Augustus Blackwood appeared to be the leader of the family group, making decisions about how to handle Jake's resistance to joining their eternal household. Eleanor focused on domestic preparations, arranging living spaces and necessities for Jake's permanent residence. The Blackwood children, now revealed to be supernatural entities who had been preserved at various ages throughout their long existence in the house, served as both guards and companions, preventing Jake from leaving while also providing the social interaction that made the family's eternal imprisonment bearable. Thomas Blackwood served as Jake's primary handler, using his more recent experience with the modern world to help Jake understand his situation and begin the psychological process of accepting his new reality. Thomas showed Jake photographs and belongings from other recent additions to the household, explaining how each person had eventually found peace and happiness as members of the extended Blackwood family. The outside world ages and dies, Thomas explained during one of their encounters. People grow old, get sick, lose their loved ones, and face uncertainty every day. Here, we're protected from all of that. We have each other, we have our home, and we have forever to enjoy it. Jake's resistance gradually weakened as the supernatural family demonstrated their ability to provide for his physical and emotional needs while maintaining absolute control over his environment. The house produced fresh food, clean clothing, and entertainment that seemed to be tailored to Jake's personal preferences and interests. The family members shared stories, played games, and created a social environment that was genuinely pleasant despite its supernatural nature. But Jake's commitment to documenting his experience remained strong, and he continued recording video and audio evidence of his entrapment even as he began to accept that escape might be impossible. His documentation would prove crucial to understanding what had happened to him and potentially preventing others from suffering the same fate. The breakthrough came when Jake discovered that the house's supernatural preservation had limitations. While the Blackwood family could manipulate the internal environment and prevent physical escape, they couldn't completely control electronic communications or prevent information from leaving the property through wireless means. Jake's cell phone, while showing no signal for voice or text communication, still maintained a weak data connection that periodically allowed small amounts of information to upload to cloud storage services. His video footage and audio recordings were being automatically backed up to online servers whenever the connection was available, creating a record of his experience that existed outside the house's control. Jake began deliberately creating evidence that would help others understand the true nature of the Blackwood property. He recorded detailed explanations of the house's supernatural preservation, documented the identities of other victims whose belongings he had found, and provided specific warnings about the techniques the house used to trap visitors. Most importantly, Jake discovered that the house's power was limited to people who entered the property voluntarily. The supernatural entities could not force anyone to visit, and they had no ability to influence people who remained outside the property boundaries. Their power depended on curiosity, trespassing, and the willingness of victims to enter the house, despite obvious signs that something was wrong. This limitation gave Jake hope that his documentation might prevent others from falling into the same trap. If he could somehow get warning information to the outside world, potential future victims might be deterred from exploring the property or might take precautions that would protect them from the house's influence. Jake's opportunity came when he realized that the house's supernatural residents followed predictable patterns in their daily activities. During certain hours, particularly in the early morning when the family gathered for breakfast in the dining room, security around the property was relaxed as the entities focused their attention on maintaining their domestic routines. Jake used these periods of reduced surveillance to position his electronic devices near windows and exterior walls, maximizing the chances that his recorded warnings would successfully upload to online storage. He created multiple copies of crucial information and spread them across different devices and accounts, ensuring that even if some of his evidence was discovered and destroyed, enough would survive to warn others. The strategy worked. Over the course of several weeks, Jake's warning videos and documentation began appearing on his YouTube channel, uploaded automatically whenever his devices could establish brief connections with outside servers. The uploads were sporadic and incomplete, but they provided enough information to reveal the truth about the Blackwood property and Jake's entrapment. Jake's subscribers initially assumed that his videos were part of an elaborate fictional series or alternate reality game. The supernatural elements seemed too extreme to be real, and Jake's documented entrapment appeared to be a creative storytelling project rather than genuine evidence of paranormal activity. But as weeks passed without any normal videos or social media activity from Jake, his audience began to suspect that something was genuinely wrong. Several dedicated fans attempted to track down the location of the Blackwood property based on clues in Jake's videos, hoping to verify his situation or provide assistance. The first rescue attempt was organized by Jake's best friend and frequent exploration partner, Marcus Chen, who had been growing increasingly worried about Jake's disappearance. Marcus assembled a team of experienced urban explorers and paranormal investigators, equipped with communication equipment and safety protocols designed to prevent them from suffering the same fate as Jake. The rescue team's approach to the Blackwood property revealed the full scope of the supernatural threat that Jake was facing. As soon as the team members set foot on the property, they began experiencing the same environmental manipulation and psychological pressure that had trapped Jake. The house attempted to separate the team members and draw them inside individually, using illusions and false signals to create confusion and panic. But the rescue team's preparation and Jake's detailed warnings gave them advantages that previous victims had lacked. They maintained constant communication with outside observers, used pre-arranged signals to verify each other's safety, and established strict protocols for leaving the property if supernatural influence became too strong. The team's resistance to the house's manipulation seemed to weaken its power over Jake as well. For the first time since his entrapment began, Jake found that doors and windows in the house could be opened, and the supernatural family members became less visible and active. The house's ability to maintain its prison-like control appeared to be dependent on having complete power over all individuals on the property. Jake's escape came during a coordinated effort by the rescue team to create multiple distractions and exit opportunities simultaneously. While some team members engaged with the supernatural entities and drew their attention, others positioned themselves to assist Jake's exit from the house through a basement window that the Blackwood family had failed to secure during the chaos. Jake's emergence from the Blackwood house after weeks of supernatural imprisonment was traumatic and disorienting. The outside world seemed harsh and unfamiliar after the controlled environment of the haunted mansion, and Jake struggled with the psychological effects of having been offered immortality and eternal companionship in exchange for his freedom. But Jake's documentation of his experience provided invaluable evidence about the true nature of abandoned properties that seemed too well preserved to be genuine. His case became the foundation for new safety protocols for urban explorers and paranormal investigators, emphasizing the importance of maintaining outside communication and having backup plans for supernatural encounters. The Blackwood property was officially investigated by state authorities following Jake's rescue, but the supernatural elements proved difficult to document or address through conventional means. The house appeared completely normal to investigators who approached it with skepticism, revealing its true nature only to individuals who entered with curiosity and openness to unexplained phenomena. Jake worked with paranormal researchers and law enforcement agencies to develop strategies for protecting future potential victims, while respecting the property rights and legal limitations that prevented authorities from simply destroying the house or permanently blocking access to it. The solution involved comprehensive warning systems, enhanced monitoring of the property, and educational campaigns designed to inform urban explorers about the specific dangers of supernatural entrapment. The Blackwood family's reaction to Jake's escape was initially hostile, with increased supernatural activity and attempts to influence people in the surrounding area to visit the property. But over time, the entities seemed to accept that their secret had been exposed and that their hunting methods would need to change to adapt to increased awareness of their activities. Jake's YouTube channel became a platform for educating others about the hidden dangers of exploring abandoned properties and the importance of distinguishing between normal decay and supernatural preservation. His experience provided a template for recognizing the warning signs of haunted buildings and the techniques used by supernatural entities to trap and recruit living victims. The psychological impact of Jake's weeks-long imprisonment in the Blackwood house required extensive therapy and support to overcome. The supernatural family's offers of immortality and eternal companionship had been genuinely appealing in some ways, creating complex feelings of loss and regret alongside relief at his successful escape. Jake's relationship with exploration and documentation changed fundamentally after his experience at the Blackwood property. While he continued to investigate abandoned buildings, he approached each site with new awareness of the potential dangers and supernatural threats that could be hidden within seemingly empty structures. The other victims whose belongings Jake had found in the Blackwood house remained missing, presumably still trapped within the supernatural family's eternal household. Rescue attempts were considered but deemed too dangerous given the house's demonstrated ability to overpower and capture multiple individuals simultaneously. Instead, Jake worked with authorities and paranormal experts to develop long-term strategies for weakening the house's supernatural influence and potentially creating opportunities for the trapped victims to escape on their own. These efforts included research into the historical sources of the Blackwood family's supernatural transformation and attempts to identify and address the spiritual or magical foundations of their immortal preservation. The Blackwood property became a case study in the dangers of assuming that abandoned buildings are truly empty and harmless. Jake's documentation proved that some structures could harbor supernatural threats that specifically targeted curious explorers and researchers, using their own interests and expertise against them. Urban exploration communities worldwide began incorporating Jake's safety protocols and warning signs into their standard practices, creating new awareness of supernatural dangers alongside the conventional hazards of exploring abandoned structures. The Blackwood case became required reading for anyone planning to investigate potentially haunted properties. Jake's experience also contributed to academic research into the psychology and supernatural mechanics of haunted buildings, particularly those that appeared to be actively maintained despite official abandonment. His detailed documentation provided researchers with unprecedented insight into how supernatural entities could manipulate physical environments and human perception to create effective traps. The mystery of what had originally transformed the Blackwood family into supernatural entities remained unsolved, but researchers suspected that the family's transformation was connected to their isolation, their obsessive attachment to their ancestral home, and possibly deliberate supernatural practices that had been hidden from historical record. The house continued to stand as a monument to the dangers of curiosity without caution, its well-preserved facade hiding supernatural threats that could destroy the lives of anyone unfortunate enough to be drawn inside. Jake's warning served as a crucial protection for future potential victims, but the Blackwood family's patience and adaptability suggested that the threat would continue indefinitely. Local authorities established permanent monitoring of the property and implemented warning systems designed to alert them if anyone attempted to visit the house. But the supernatural entity's ability to manipulate electronic equipment and influence human behavior meant that conventional security measures had limited effectiveness against determined explorers. Jake's story became a cautionary tale about the price of uncovering some mysteries and the importance of recognizing when curiosity should be tempered by wisdom and self-preservation. His survival and successful documentation of the Blackwood house's supernatural threats saved countless others from the eternal imprisonment that awaited those who were drawn into the family's immortal household. The abandoned house that had seemed like the ultimate urban exploration discovery had proven to be a supernatural trap that preyed on the very qualities that made explorers effective at their work: curiosity, persistence, and willingness to enter dangerous spaces in pursuit of hidden knowledge. Jake's escape had broken the Blackwood house's perfect record of claiming every visitor, but it had not destroyed the supernatural family's ability to continue their eternal existence, or their need to periodically recruit new members. The house remained a threat, preserved and waiting for the next curious explorer who would be drawn to investigate its mysteries. The warning signs that Jake had documented The too-perfect preservation, the sense of being watched, the subtle environmental changes that indicated supernatural manipulation became essential knowledge for anyone who might encounter similar properties. But the effectiveness of these warnings depended on potential victims taking them seriously and choosing safety over the thrill of exploration. In the end, Jake's documentation of the Blackwood house served as proof that some abandoned places were never truly empty, and that the forces that could inhabit forgotten structures were far more dangerous and sophisticated than traditional ghost stories suggested. His experience showed that curiosity about abandoned America could lead to discoveries that were fascinating, terrifying, and potentially deadly. The house stood as a reminder that not all mysteries were meant to be solved, and that some doors should remain forever closed. Jake's survival had provided crucial knowledge about supernatural threats hiding in abandoned buildings, but it had also revealed the existence of dangers that conventional wisdom and modern technology were inadequate to address. The Blackwood Estate remained an active supernatural threat, its Victorian elegance concealing an immortal family that would continue to hunt for new members as long as curious explorers were drawn to investigate the mysteries of abandoned America. Jake's warning had saved many potential victims, but the house's patience was infinite, and its hunger for new residents would never be satisfied. Have you ever explored an abandoned building that felt too well preserved, too perfectly maintained for a place that was supposed to be empty? Have you experienced that unsettling feeling of being watched in places where no living person should be present? If this account of supernatural entrapment in abandoned properties has opened your eyes to the hidden dangers that may lurk in forgotten buildings, subscribe to our channel for more investigations into the dark forces that inhabit America's abandoned places. Share your own experiences with suspicious abandoned properties in the comments below. Your awareness and caution could save someone else from becoming a permanent resident of a house that refuses to stay empty.